Sveiki įsijungę Lietuvą Ameriką, kaip visad su jumis esu aš, Vinsas. Šiandienos serija tai žvilgsnis į mūsų dabartį, į mūsų pasaulį, kuriame laisvė ir demokratija vis labiau tampa iššūkiu, o jau nebe savaime suprantamų dalykų ar net siekių. Šiandieną kalbame su Damonu Wilsonu, National Endowment for Democracy prezidentu, apie tai, ką reiškia ginti laisvę, kaip pasaulis keičiasi ir naratyvą perima autokratai, kuriems grinai nusispjauti ant mažų tautų norą gyventi laisvai. Ir reikia grįžti į aktyvų laisvės skleidimą. Kuo toliau, tuo aiškiau pasaulis nebus laisvas. Jei mes tylėsim ir leisime autokratams formuoti naratyvą ir įtikinėti mūsų pačių piliečius, kokie mes patys blogi. Gero klausimo.
Oh, hello, Damon.
Hi there. I'm so sorry, Žygis. Hi.
No, it's absolutely okay. We are all busy. You just have the beginning of the day. So just to introduce, Vincentas is like, young generation of Republicans who is fighting for the future. He's international secretary of his own young Republican organization. So he's
Young Christian Democrats.
yeah, I'm transforming it to American context. So he's me like 30 years ago. And his family repatriated, re-emigrated from America. That's also interesting. From Chicago.
Is that right? Close the door.
Damon, I have to confess, at 20 minutes, I have another online with Germans. And, Germans are now coming. Chancellor Merz is coming to Vilnius and so on. So Vincentas will follow up. Can I just start immediately? So let's talk a bit about Ned. Honestly, nobody except of my generation and older knows Ned in Lithuania. Can you say a few words about what is Ned globally and also maybe in American context, why Ned should be important for Americans? I could just, maybe provoke you and say a few words how I remember Ned. First of all, Ned is one of the instruments of Reagan to defeat communism. Ned helped us to pick up with our national movement Sąjūdis, like in Poland, Solidarność. Even the Catholic Chronicle that our church was printing underground was distributed with Ned. Our ambassador Gintis is telling it to me. Karl Gershman was telling, okay, some other stuff through our parliament. Ned trains Ukrainian, Moldovan, Georgian, and all other parliamentarians to follow our track. And, just global issues. I remember in the events we made together, we met Cuban dissidents. You connected me with Taiwanese freedom fighters. So for me, I have no questions. This is the best institution I ever met to help me with my freedom fight and cause. So, why those questions are still rising but if you could describe it globally through American perspective.
Žygis, it's awesome being with you. It's awesome being with brothers in arms as freedom fighters. And that is the endowment. You just gave the story well. The National Endowment for Democracy, you can think of it as America's foundation for freedom. And you're absolutely right. It began in a pretty dark time. 42 years ago, President Reagan stood up at a time where communism was on the march, the Soviets looked strong, military juntas everywhere. And he stood up and gave this incredible speech called the Westminster Address. It was in the British Parliament. And he said, look, we need to not live side by side with totalitarianism and just accept that. We need to have confidence in democracy. And he said, look, democracy is not a fragile flower, but it does need cultivating. It needs support. It needs nurturing. And he challenged everyone to say, we should understand that if we're confident in our values, that one day Marxism, Leninism would find its place on the ash heap of history. But these things require us to support people who believe in freedom. And that's what led to the National Endowment standing by the Solidarity movement, standing by those behind the Iron Curtain, supporting Ukrainian Democrats before the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was the endowment so that the American people could be seen as supporting those who seek freedom around the world, but in a really brilliant way at the time, 4 decades ago, Congress said, let's not do this as a government agency, as another U.S. government agency. But Democrats and Republicans came together in Congress and said, this should be a private effort representing private Americans supporting their brothers and sisters around the world through private means, but backed up by public support so that we can do tough things. And that led to the endowment being created as a private institution with public backing, funded by the American taxpayers, with the muscle, if you will, of Congress to help us support those freedom fighters that are in difficult circumstances where it's really tough for private philanthropy to do that behind the Iron Curtain within Russia today. But that's what NED was built for. And so it really it is America's foundation for freedom. And just as it was 4 decades ago, we stand by those in the toughest challenges. If you're on the island of Cuba, if you're in Venezuela, if you are in Russia today, in Belarus today, in China, in Iran, the endowment is there to show American people supporting their brothers and sisters in a very diverse, pluralistic way, with workers and free entrepreneurs and human rights defenders and journalists. It's a very diverse concept that also supports political party development and sort of the constructive parts of how to make a democracy work. And that's the endowment. We represent the ground game of America with pro-freedom allies in more than 100 countries around the world today.
I just have a quick question. I mean, this sounds incredible and great. I'm very happy to be talking to you. But, you see that the endowment, it comes from this sort of want way back when, to really consolidate the American values of freedom and just American values in general, right? But do we still have those values? Because it seems that we're to a bit of a stumble right now.
Look, we've got big debates in the United States, across European countries, and that's what democracy does. Democracy gives the space for debate, disagreements, self-correcting mechanisms, a way to calibrate, to be accountable to your people, and you can have it out. You can argue, thrash it out. It doesn't mean you're going to have the best healthcare policy because you've got a democracy. It means you can debate it. And so that's built into our mechanisms of freedom. What we're trying to do is say we don't wade into competitive electoral environments. We don't wade into U.S. politics in that sense. But we do stand by a fundamental truth that others should be able to enjoy the fundamental freedoms that we cherish as Americans, whether you're on the left, the right, whether you're on the far left, the far right, or you're a radical centrist. Those fundamental freedoms are universal. And so we do stand by. If you think about it just practically, because of NED partners, we know of the story of Mahsa Amini in Iran, a story that could have been sort of lost as a regional story, a young woman who didn't wear her headscarf the right way. And because of that was picked up by Morality Peace and turned up, killed. That is something that NED partners help to do to help the world understand what's happening. We see it in spades today related to what the Chinese Communist Party is doing globally. One of the NED partners that we have the pleasure and honor of supporting helped document that the CCP actually ran 48 police stations around the world, including one in Manhattan, that were used to target Chinese dissidents in free societies. Thanks to that work, those police stations, so-called police stations, have been shut down. And so there is, I think, a real consensus if you look at what we do to support the Venezuelan opposition and democratic movement today is something that has a lot of support on both sides of the aisle here and across the Atlantic. So even as we disagree as free societies, even as we disagree politically between Christian Democrats and social democrats, I think this is back to first principles. Do we believe you should be able to have protected speech, to worship who you want to worship? These fundamental freedoms are something that I think still unify us across a political spectrum. And by putting just a little bit of support, it's usually more moral support rather than material support, we can do a lot to advance our own country's interests, because when people who love freedom succeed, it is really good for a country like Lithuania, a country like the United States. It's really good for our national security. I think you know that intimately, given where you live.
Damon, when I see you, when I listen to you, I still remember my first impression when I met you in the White House. You've been then serving President Bush. I was so deeply shocked that this Damon that I see for the first time in my life, he's like in my head. He understands everything. I then came to DC after my long 3.5 years posting in Brussels. Honestly, like 1 out of 10 maybe in Brussels then was getting what I have in my brain and in my heart. You got it directly. And that's what Ned is for me. You are fighting for something basic, for something, 1/3 of Lithuania, died in the woods and Gulag.
That's right.
But like repeating what Vincentas asked you, if I don't share those universal values, I think just about my own profits, my own.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just American living somewhere in the, I don't know, far away from DC and New York. Why Ned matters for me? Can you explain, 1/3 of my nation actually is living in America.
Sure.
1 million of Americans are living, but why should it matter for just normal American citizen who doesn't even travel to Europe or globe?
Well, two things. First, Jigas, you're right that I believe desperately in American support for the captive nations, because I learned about what I took for granted as American because I came to live in the Baltic states in 1992 and saw you recreating your democracies in an extraordinary way. One of my best friends and at school was a dissident who had fled from Romania, and his son became my best friend in 3rd grade, a Baha'i whose family had fled Iran. I had to see it through the eyes of non-Americans to understand what I took for granted. So if you live in the United States, you don't always appreciate and understand what we have and what others don't, and why that's good for us. So why is it good for the average American? If you're concerned about our southern border, if you're concerned about illegal immigration, do you think 8 million Venezuelans just left their country because they wanted to? They left their country because a dictator took over, turned it into an organized mafia state, is raping and pillaging the wealth of incredible Venezuela, a incredible wealthy country in Latin America, for personal gain and profit, in a way that has destroyed the human dignity, the lives, the income, divided families, and it has led 8 million people to vote with their feet and leave. And many of them are in their neighboring countries. Many of them have come across our southern border to the United States. Now, if you really are concerned about that, they don't go home because of a deal with Maduro, a transactional deal to take 3 flights. That doesn't work. But if there were a democratic transition, Maria Corina Machado and President-elect Gonzalez were back in Caracas today, trying to rebuild the rule of law, a sense of accountability, responsiveness to citizen needs, that we're restoring human dignity to governance in Venezuela, you would see a tremendous return of people wanting to live in their country with their families. It would be the biggest family reunification program in history. And it's because of freedom. It's not because of some deal. It's because of freedom. And I think the American people understand that. If you don't want to see refugees flowing, it helps to have democratic regimes that don't go to war against each other. Aggressors, authoritarians that invade their neighbors, that's usually not a democratic state. It usually is an authoritarian regime. Look at Russia, Ukraine today. These things are what prevent the concerns that we all have, whether it's inflation because of conflict, irregular migration because of refugee movements or collapsed regimes. But it's also where organized crime, where drug trade, where terrorism flourish in the darkness of authoritarianism. That does not flourish in a society that is marked by rule of law, transparency, and accountability. And when that happens, we are all safer, more secure, and more prosperous. And that's the beauty of these modest roles that we play together to support freedom fighters around the world.
Can I just ask last question, Vincente? And I'm really leaving to this German chat. So I lived in America for 5 years, and you know what I discovered? This is a huge country. This is not a country, it's a continent. And sometimes people, not Damon like you, sometimes those who are not traveling abroad, they don't know at all, basic stuff about Europeans. You know, I had 4 kids. They were learning about Europe. You know, when they showed me the material about Europe, I thought, oh my God, how could those Americans distinguish Russian from Lithuanian and Dutch from French and German? We are so different. And that's why I think Ned is important, because you see the whole picture for Americans. Those bad guys, they work together in the same Venezuela. Those are Russians and Chinese, Iranians and North Koreans. Those bad guys are working together to kill freedom and democracy. And sometimes in America, for different reasons, for political reasons, you don't see the whole picture, but those enemies see it. They see that you don't see it, and they use it, killing you little by little. And, you know, when I meet Americans who are kind of enthusiastic about Russians, and I'm like shocked, they don't understand that Americans for Russians, even President Trump for Putin, is arch enemy, like number one, but they are so wise as Russians that they fool those Americans. So this is my feeling. Ned is important to see, to show the whole picture.
Well, Zhigas, look, I mean, partly why Congress gave us this mandate was to build a foundation that was built on expertise and knowledge and humility. And so our staff speaks 45 languages. Many of them have heritage that comes from countries around the world. Our job on behalf of the American people is to understand the details, the politics, the nuance, but also understand that it's not America's role to solve all these problems. And so the way that NET operates, in many respects, you could say it's an American first approach, is we don't come up with strategies for Americans to go implement to impose our values or solutions on other societies that don't work or are not sustainable. What we do is we find amazing people. We're talent scouts, amazing people with great ideas on the ground who care about their country, who love their country, but share democratic values with us. And they want to solve their country's problems. And then we say, look, it's worth giving them a little bit of support and backup, because when they succeed, it's really good, not just for their country, it's going to be really good for my country, the United States. And so we perform this sort of service on behalf of the American people with a mandate from Congress to try to understand the culture, the context, the politics. But we also have to understand, even as we uplift those on the ground in countries around the world who are fighting for freedom in a peaceful way, we also are an institution that understands the connections. It can see how are dictatorships, how are authoritarian regimes working together to manipulate technology, to promote their propaganda, to undermine democracy and rule of law through their financial investments that are linked to their political strategies. And we can unpack this and explain it. That's why the endowment helped coin the term sharp power, because many people thought, oh, another Confucius Institute, we can learn Mandarin at our university. No, we help document that many of these instruments of influence are what we call sharp power. They were ways to introduce non-democratic means into free societies. So, for example, if you're at a Confucius Institute in an African country, you may be paid $800 simply to put your name on an op-ed that is written in Beijing, makes the case, the Chinese case, but can be published with an African voice and an African paper looking very authentic. It's not. That is not soft power. That is sharp power. And so the endowment helps our country understand the challenge that freedom faces around the world. And this is a consequential moment for freedom. And we need to not be pulling apart. We need free societies to work together to push back and to protect the freedom that has made our people more secure and more prosperous.
Thank you, Dana. I'm leaving at this moment, but Vincentus will have few follow-up questions. See you soon. Yeah, everybody. Thank you, Dana.
But it seems that, you know, the enemies of freedom, Russia, Iran, they obviously slander and attack in terms of communication the endowment, right? And it seems they seem to be winning, is what I'm going to say. They seem to be winning, and the question is, how do we fight back and stop being on the defensive end? And
so, look, first of all, yes, you are correct that whether it's Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Havana, they spend a strange amount of time, I have to admit, attacking the National Endowment for Democracy. It always makes me smile because we're a pretty modest organization based here in Washington. they don't fear us. They fear their own people. And so what they're trying to do is to gaslight their own populations by saying the millions and millions of people on the streets of Hong Kong, that they aren't there because of their concern about the loss of rule of law in Hong Kong. They're there because Ned is conjuring them and calling them to the streets. And are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? It's as if the Russians saying that the reason Ukraine had the Maidan, or the Ukrainians are resisting, is because of the endowment, because of Ned. That is so offensive if you're a Ukrainian or a Hong Konger who has struggled for the rights and dignity of your own nation to protect your sovereignty against Beijing or against Moscow. And so they really spend their time attacking us because they want to undermine their own people. They fear their own people and want to gaslight them in saying that they're being the tools of foreign instruments. It's so not true. In many respects, I say we have the honor at times of, when people seek support, for us to give them that moral support. And we're proud to stand behind people, but it is their country, their culture, their ideas, their struggle. So I do think in this moment that is a challenging one for freedom around the world, our best defense is not a defense, it's offense. I think we need to be confident in our values. We need to understand that if we just support ordinary people in repressed societies, they will know best how to exploit the vulnerabilities of the authoritarians. Vulnerabilities like those not having good decision-making because they can't have an open debate and identify the weakness of their argument. It's why Putin sort of so blindly invaded Ukraine and got into a debacle for his nation. It's the noise and debates in a free society that helps us self-correct, if you will. And so I think we need to be on offense and pushing back against authoritarian challenges, of thinking where we have opportunities to support democratic transitions, those openings, whether they come all of a sudden in a place like Bangladesh or Syria. How do we lean in to help tip the balance in the favor of freedom, even though it's tricky?
If I may interrupt really quick, I mean, it's what I'm hearing from you is that we also need to have our own people on our side if we want to do that, right? And it seems to me that, the Russians, the Iranians, they're really good at this, counterintelligence communication, right? And they're turning our own people's opinion against us, right? These people that want to spread freedom around the world and all this. So how do we convince our own people that this is so absolutely necessary?
We got to get out there and hustle, make the case. We got to make the case. It's why your work is so important, why Gigas is so important. I also think for Americans, we really benefit from hearing from our friends because we are a big country. I think about my family, and they're scattered across the United States, and how distant some of this can be to their daily lives. And so it does really help us to hear from our friends, our freedom friends, our friends in freedom, about why the United States continued support for this effort. It really matters, and it matters for our interests. But we've got to be able to make the case. We can't just take it for granted. We got to explain why this benefits our own people, why it does make them safer, more secure, more prosperous. That's exactly as Secretary Rubio put it when he was going through his confirmation hearing. We need to be able to justify the funds that we spend around the world in a way that comes back to Americans being more secure, more prosperous. I think that's a absolutely fair question, a fair bar, that we've got to do reform without throwing the baby out without the out of the bathwater. And so it comes to politicians, perhaps like yourself, certainly like Gigas, to make this case to the public as well, and to other decision makers.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. It's wonderful to have someone like you saying it. So before we end, I don't want to take any more of your time. Is there something that you'd like to say to I don't know, young Lithuanians about what we can do to keep our freedom going for many years to come?
Well, look, you can live in Lithuania today and think life is really hard. You don't have as much prosperity as maybe your colleagues in Berlin or London. That's a dangerous moment as you see what's happening in Ukraine. But you can also look at life in Lithuania and understand from a historic perspective, you're sovereign. You control your own destiny. You have more rule of law, accountability, more wealth than in your history. And how is this something we preserve? And as an American, you can say, look at us. Like, we're a small country that is now able to stand by your side, that is able to do things in partnership to support the United States. That Lithuania doesn't need foreign assistance from the United States. Lithuania needs trade and investment. That Lithuania can be a partner within NATO and within the European Union. Do you know what a good return on investment that is for the United States? It's enormous to have friends and allies and partners, whether we get into a military conflict and you're by our side in NATO, or whether we can find ways through our economies to help generate wealth for our people. This is a good deal for us. And so I think we just need to understand the power that comes from freedom, not take it for granted, and just know that it's going to be up to your generation, your colleagues in Lithuania, to help keep this right, to help keep this in the right direction, because you've had a very painful history, a very painful recent history. It is not inevitable that you are secure, that you are sovereign, that you are free, and that you are relatively prosperous. You got to fight for that. You got to hold on to that. And that takes really smart, principled decision-making, a clear set of values, and really pragmatic way of understanding how to develop policies to back that up. And that's going to come to your generation of politicians and policymakers. So we're counting on you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And once again, thank you for your time. And let's keep this good fight going. Thank you
It's
very
an
much.
honor to be with you, and look forward to seeing you in Vilnius the next time I'm there. The capital of freedom.
Dėkojame, kad buvote su mumis. Šiais laikais tikrai ypatingai svarbu pagalvoti, ar mes darome tikrai užtektinai dėl savo pačių laisvės. Ir kodėl kartais toks jausmas susidaro, kad ir ką mes be padarytume, vis tiek atrodo, jog pralaimime. Damonas Wilsonas pasidalino labai aiškia ir svarbia žinutė. Mes turime grįžti į aktyvų laisvės skleidimą. Jei šie klausimai jums rūpi, jei norite, kad pasaulis judėtų teisinga kryptimi, klausykite, komentuokite, dalinkitės ir laiko nelaukite. Iki sekančio.